This project came about after a survey we did in 2021 about experiences of discrimination. And those experiences of discrimination told us that visible minorities and immigrants experience discrimination far more than white non-immigrants. And the form of discrimination that they experience is most likely to be a microaggression. So an unintended joke or some kind of harm that's done that wasn't intentional, but it was perceived by the person who received it as harmful. This guidebook kind of came out of that. We were presenting the results of the discrimination survey, and people would say, "What are we doing wrong? We don't know what we're doing wrong." And so this guidebook intended to provide some of the language about what are we talking about when we're talking about equity, diversity, inclusion, what's important to consider, what are microaggressions, how do we turn away from microaggressions to doing microaffirmations and making sure people feel included in the community, and how do we make sure we support people, and then how do we create organizations that really are building on belonging for everybody in the organization and for everybody in the community, not just the people who have always been here. Our intended audience for this guidebook was organizations, municipalities, education institutions. We really saw those as the key areas where we could have impact. Some of those places were already interested in doing some of this work, but they didn't know how to get started. And so this guidebook was the tool, the impetus for them to get started and dive deeper into this kind of work. I think ultimately we're all working together to, the Immigration Partnership and the many different organizations that we work alongside, we're all working together to make this a more inclusive community where people feel welcome and they feel like they belong, that they are celebrated here despite their differences. Those differences are welcomed and appreciated.
So the first section that we have is the purpose, and I'm going to read the first few words on the page. It says, "Everyone belongs in Huron County." So there's a lot of words after that, but just that first sentence really seals in that every single person that is here belongs here, regardless of who they are. We went into key terms. Some of those key terms included racism, sexism, ableism, ageism. That helps us to build some capacity. It also helped folks within this rural community to understand that and get on the same page that, when we are thinking about belonging, it's not just about race. It's not just newcomers. It's not just one particular group. We all need a sense of belonging. The next section really focused on an equity lens, and this was important. And although we didn't expand on an equity lens, we gave enough for folks to understand and organizations that it's systems. So where do we use this? Sometimes we think about belonging. We're thinking about having those potlucks, those barbecues. We bring everybody in together, community events. All those things are important, but it's also policy, practices, projects, how we design things that we do, implementation plans, and much more. So having to ensure that when we're thinking about belonging, that folks in this community are thinking beyond just the individual. Next, of course, we went right into intersectionality, that people are just not one thing. They have many parts of what makes them who they are, so that we don't box people into a singular stereotype, that we're thinking beyond that and thinking about the complexity of what diversity means. We have the wheel of privilege. Everyone always loves that. You're able to visually see how complex power and privilege is and where people fall. The next section really looks at the 4 I's of oppression. So it talked about ideological oppression, interpersonal oppression that happens between people, institutional oppression that's within systems, processes, governance, and policies. And then the last one is internalized oppression. Is how does that impact people who have experienced different types of oppression? How do they view themselves? How does it impact the way they show up in the world? So microaggressions is something that Huron County really wanted us to focus on after they looked at their studies and results from their surveys. And we went through the 3 types of microaggressions. We gave a description and we gave an example or 2 of each one so that folks can understand how common it is, what it looks like, what it may sound like, and how it may impact folks. The next area was microaffirmations, which was very important to counter those microaggressions. So we don't want to just respond, we want to be proactive and give microaffirmations. And lastly, we ended with steps for organizations.
The promising practice here is that it really honed in on rural experiences. And it took a rural lens on the concepts of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it created plain language that connected to people who are from rural communities who don't have a lot of experience around diversity, equity, inclusion, and those conversations. So that's the unique part of this. The information certainly existed long before we did this. We're not unique in that manner. But what the unique part is that the rural part of this hadn't got the same amount of attention.
It's a customized tool, and it was made in collaboration with guidance from Huron County and also lived experience as well. This is very specific to the climate in rural Ontario, and it meets a specific need. When you actually go through the toolkit and you think about the microaggressions, there's the external and internal sector research that was done in the development of this tool, and looking at survey results, looking at data and research and community feedback of like, what is the experience within small town rural communities? What are things that you're hearing? What are specific experiences that are different from other communities? And it really focused on those needs and made sure that they were fulfilled within this guide.
This guidebook is efficient because it is a concrete document that people can turn back to. They can hold it on their desk. They can grab it when they need it. As we know, people often don't read from cover to cover, but they look for the little bits and pieces of information that are applicable to the situation they're encountering right now. And this guidebook is great because it is intended and it's designed to get people information quickly. If you want to talk about microaggressions, the page is there. If you want to talk about intersectionality, the page is there. If you're wondering about different forms of discrimination, there's an example in providing information there. If you're thinking about what are the next steps our organization needs to take next to build diversity and equity and inclusion, there's a page there. So it's really designed to be bite-sized information, swallow a little bit by a little bit, not take all the information at once. We measure performance with survey data, and those were online surveys of people who were part of a webinar. They had received a copy of the publication and they'd attended a webinar about the publication with Melissa, and we gathered feedback from them. That's the tools we use to track the effectiveness of this. And then along with the other feedback of events that happened that weren't organized by the LIP, but by partner organizations, and the number of people who attended various activities. It was a very positive feedback that we received. You know, people were really feeling like this publication and the launch events were really valuable to them, and that they learned from them, and that they became champions of the document themselves and started using it within their organizations with colleagues and teammates, and then sharing it to other partner organizations. So it kind of had a ripple effect from there. The features that people liked were that it was bite-sized information, that it broke down concepts that they might have heard about in the news or somebody talk about, but they didn't fully understand. So they liked that it was bite-sized. They liked that it was easy to understand. They liked that they were treated as somebody who is interested in learning but not being lectured at. They loved that. They also loved that there were some real practical steps included within the publication. So there were questions for organizations who wanted to build on equity, diversity, and inclusion work. There were tips on how to create microaffirmations rather than microaggressions. So those things were really valuable, and we heard that those tools and tips and simple language and bite-sized information were the real winners of that publication.
People like how accessible it is. People like that they feel like they can be a part of the solution and they're just not problematized. Like, well, what can I do to make these changes? They feel empowered by it, that they can make the changes and that they can support belonging within their communities.
The partners surprised us because we didn't expect them to take it on the way that they did. So, studying it as a group work plan and going through it page by page and taking weeks to go through it and discuss it and use it as a document, that was something that they really wanted the staff to understand. We didn't expect that to happen. We were really impressed with how our partners picked up this information, digested it, made it their own, and then took action further. So we had the United Way, for instance. They made sure all their staff were trained in this and they went through it as a workbook together. And then that led them to host, with the health unit, a belonging conference this year that was attended by 200 people, and to have conversations about how to build more belonging in rural communities. It was taken up by the school board and distributed to management throughout that public school board here, and to teachers as a tool for classrooms and to build knowledge among staff about diversity, equity, inclusion. That led to the local school board marking the first International Day against the elimination of racial discrimination last March, with presentations to 1,700 students, and they're planning to repeat that again this year. It's also been effective with our cultural services department, our libraries and museums. They held a conference this year on the topic of belonging within the arts and culture. So it's something that's just, it ripples. So for other communities that are interested in doing this work, there's a couple things to keep in mind. Make sure that the consultant you work with is somebody who understands and lives your context. And the second is to make sure the information is chunked out into bite-sized bits of information so that it's really easy to digest the information and to absorb it. It's really easy to find the information. And it's really important that you have a print resource. Print resource is something that people will return to again and again. It's something they'll thumb through many different times, whereas digital doesn't have the same value in terms of findability, people's attention spans, the way that they will return to it.
It's really important that you have different stakeholders looking and contributing to these types of guides. I wouldn't advise one person to develop a guide like this, because when you have so many different voices and perspectives and expertise, it really helps. I would always advise that these tools should be customized. Northern communities, you're going to want to, especially if there's a high Indigenous population, this tool would need to be revamped, or just create a very specific tool for that community. Because if you give people more than the community is ready for, and you skip steps, then you lose that opportunity to really build a strong foundation and build that capacity so that folks can continue the work. You don't just want folks to understand, you want them to be able to implement. So you want to ensure that you're taking those steps so that folks are able to do that, and always honor the communities that you're creating these guides for. There's not a one size fits all either for larger communities. They're not all the same. They really are not. The needs are very different. So it's really about being adaptable and not painting smaller communities with one paint stroke and larger communities with one paint stroke.
I have found that most people want to help. They want to help. They want to say the right things. They want to make sure people feel included and like they belong. They just need the right language and the right tools to help them do that. And tools like this guidebook were designed to help them help, and to say the right things, and to expand their knowledge so that they can welcome, they can include, they can make sure that this is a community that celebrates everybody and everyone belongs.